a friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie, yo, 600. 600. 600. Day in the neighborhood. My brothers and sisters, we have made it to Reaction Beanie, yo, 600, y'all. And all I can say to that Bean team is, let's get the Reaction Beanie Yo 700. And we're going to start this journey off today to get to 700 by going back to my brother from another mother. And that brother is Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions. Back to Evil Intentions, y'all. And the title of the video is Skull Broken Open with Bat on New Year's Day in Arcade Full of Children. The story of Johnny Habib. Now, that was just a lot to take in from the title, man. Skull broken open with bat on New Year's Day in Arcade Full of Children. You know what I'm saying, man? I got so many questions just from this title. Like, whoever got their skull broken open, were they like in an altercation with somebody, like a random person in this arcade, that they a complete stranger that they never had met before, or was it a beef that had already started earlier and now they found them there in the arcade and now they decided to attack them then and there? And it's so crazy because it say in an arcade full of children, like there's a lot of people around, and whoever attacked Johnny didn't give a F who was watching. Long story short, short story long, man. I don't know, y'all. I got a lot of questions going into this one, but we're about to get some answers. But before we get those answers, Bean Team, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. We are back to Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions. Y'all got what y'all need. Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Here in Times Square, New York City, on the 12th annual New Year's Rockin' Eve on ABC, and what a happy crowd we've got. They are waiting. There you can see they're directing their attention skyward. Yeah, there it is. They've lighted the ball up there, and the crowd has reacted to it. They know that it's going to begin to move in less than 4 minutes from now. Tonight, the crowd is estimated at 500,000. I think that's a little high, to tell you the truth. It's about 25 degrees here. In less than 3 minutes, they're going to be going bananas. 5, 4, 3, 2,
Happy New Year.
Las Vegas, New York, and Hollywood. Happy New Year from ABC and New Year's Rockin' Eve.
The year was now 1984, a new opportunity to conquer goals, celebrate with loved ones, and take the new year on with optimism and hope. A fresh start. While millions across the country were busy celebrating the new year, grateful for what they had, celebrations would be the last thing on the minds of one family on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Because not even 24 hours into the new year, horror would unfold when a young man with a promising future fell victim to a heinous attack, one that would end up claiming his life. And the brutality and senselessness of it all would make this new year full of anguish and grief for those who love them the most. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is Strangers, the story of Johnny Habib.
And I just got to point out that Jose kind of answered one of my questions, I think, y'all, because I was wondering, like, was this just like a random altercation that he got into with complete strangers? You know what I'm saying? When this happened, and he said strangers, the story of Johnny Habib. So maybe that's the lane we going down. But you know, one thing that's so crazy to me, y'all, 1984 was 40 freaking years ago. That was a long time ago now, y'all. Time just flies, man. The years just go by and by. We already finna be in 2025. Just think about how fast time just fly like that. Let's go.
Johnny Habib was born in 1966 and resided on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. In the 70s, the Upper East Side of Manhattan was changing very quickly. What was once considered a part of the city where mostly those with children resided and not much was going on after the sun set was now bustling with young people from all over the city and out of state. It started when the area saw the opening of different bars and restaurants on several avenues of the neighborhood. They soon became hotspots for college students and others who had made the move. This part of the city was even sometimes more affordable than other parts of the city, and it drew many who wanted to experience life in the Big Apple. They came in droves. For example, the building Normandy Court on 95th between 2nd and 3rd earned the nickname Dormandy Court because of the large group of students who had been living there. Some of the younger residents had help from their parents to be able to afford it, while others had jobs to sustain themselves. Today, the rent at a building like Normandy Court ranges from $3,700 to $6,000 a month.
Woo!
The Upper East Side was where Johnny resided with his mother and his siblings. They lived on East 83rd Street on Lexington Ave. He was born to his mother, who worked as a bookkeeper, and his father, who worked as an executive sales agent at a textiles firm in Manhattan, both caring parents. Johnny was his father's only child at the time, while his mother had 2 other children, Johnny being the youngest. Unfortunately, when Johnny was just 5, his parents would separate, but it didn't change how much they cared for or supported him. He was very much loved by them both. As a kid, he attended PS6, just a few blocks away, where he made plenty of friends and was well liked. He was described by some as being a happy and charismatic kid, as well as gentle, thoughtful, and sometimes shy. He was also described as very bright. Much of his childhood was spent around the area, except for when it got to be freezing cold in the Big Apple, and he'd spend some weekends in Florida, where the weather was the total opposite. Going to places like Central Park and having gone to school in the area, he became very familiar with the other kids. He made friends easily. He went to day camp at Rodef Shalom, not far from home, and had his bar mitzvah at 13 years old. Aside from that, he would spend some portions of his summers at sleepaway camps like Camp Ranger and Camp Wanake outside of the city. This offered a chance to be away from the big city noise, a chance to be surrounded by nature, to socialize and do different activities with other kids his age.
Johnny sounded like a good kid growing up, you know what I'm saying? An adventurous kid too, you know, he liked the outdoors and stuff like that. But I'm just wondering, man, how did we get to the point of his skull getting broken by these strangers? Like, did they get in some type of crazy ass argument, y'all? Let's find out.
He got older, Johnny found himself interested in different things, and he was looking to be done with high school. So far, he had attended private schools Baldwin and Anglo-American, but by 1983, he would be finishing up high school at City As, an alternative high school in Lower Manhattan. Now a teenager, looking to think of his next move, Johnny was coming into his own and becoming focused on what he wanted to do with his future. Over the last few years, he had put a lot of time into different hobbies, everything from collecting toy soldiers, to baseball cards, to autographs of the many athletes that he had crossed paths with or had connections to. This was because, for a while, His mother dated a man who owned the very popular Sticks and Eddies, a restaurant and hotspot that players were known to frequent. He loved sports. One of his favorites was tennis, and he devoted a lot of time to it. For a while, he even had dreams of being a professional player one day. But as he got older, his interests shifted. He was now really into skating. In the 70s and all through the 80s, roller skating was like an explosion on the scene. New York had a lot of roller rinks popping up around the city. They played all the popular disco, R&B, and funk tunes of the era, leading to those spots becoming just as popular as other well-established clubs. Johnny would become well known in the skating scene in New York, skating at popular spots like the Roxy down in Chelsea and a spot called Good Skates in East Setauket, Long Island. He also visited former nightclubs like Xenon and Studio 54 pretty often. Some might be thinking that he was too young to be at these places, but New York was very different back then. A lot of teens were known to get into these spots. Some events were for the younger crowd, and others were strictly for adults, but teens would find their way in, or they knew the right people. Johnny loved the music, the atmosphere, and being surrounded by so many others who wanted to lose themselves in the moment and have a good time. By 17 or 18 years old, he was about 6'1" with a lanky frame and as active as can be. He could be seen around the neighborhood in his signature black shorts and striped t-shirts, out and about. He never got into any problems. He just enjoyed the same things as a lot of teens his age. Designer clothes and dressing nice, the latest electronics, meeting girls, dancing, something he was said to be very good at, skating, and everything about the disco scene. He had become distracted from his schoolwork for a time, and that's when he decided to attend City As. The school combined schoolwork with internships and jobs outside of the school to see if some of the kids might get an idea of what they wanted to do in the future. In the fall of 1983, he would land an internship with a networking organization ran by a man named Jerry Rubin. While here, Johnny ran errands and cleaned up around the office 2 days a week. He wasn't paid anything, but he just liked being there. A club like Studio 54 was known to have all the big celebrities in attendance pretty much every night they opened their doors. You can mention Studio 54 today, and plenty of people know what that club was like, even if they weren't around back then. Rubin viewed Johnny as trustworthy, thoughtful, and self-assured, so one day, he trusted him to be the man that worked the door at the club. It would be a moment that became a highlight for Johnny. He'd often tell his father and rest of the family about the famous people he had seen coming in and out, even asking his father if he would like to come see for himself sometime. The lights, the cameras, the high-profile parties, he enjoyed every bit of it. He loved the party scene, but he kept his head in his books at the same time. He was looking to put school behind him, and he was set to receive his diploma at the end of January of 1984, so he stuck to it. He had a taste for the finer things in life, but also understood that he had to work his way there. He was thinking of different career paths to take up in the future, everything from computers to medicine. His family knew him well and knew that whatever he decided on, he would likely be great at it, and maybe even end up running a business one day. His witty personality and talents in different areas were sure to land him somewhere that he felt comfortable. They had absolutely no doubts that he would be successful.
Like, I feel like Johnny could have maybe been successful in the like all the celebrities that he was meeting. One day he could have possibly been one of those celebrities. You know what I'm saying? Because he was great at dance and he loved dance and he in the dance spot. He's seeing all these celebrities. He working the door. You know what I'm saying? So he pretty much interacting with everybody who coming in and out. One of them days it could have just been that one celebrity, an actor, a singer, a dancer, or whoever that just put him on. You know what I'm saying? Give him an opportunity. And now Johnny in Hollywood. Now that sound way better than the story that's actually happened, y'all. It kind of got me a little excited, man, but that ain't what happened. But it could have happened, and I wish it would have happened.
On the morning of Sunday, January 1st of 1984, after a weekend of New Year's Eve celebrations, Johnny would wake up at around 11 a.m., ready for what the new year had in store for him. But what he didn't know was that just a few hours later, he would be in a hospital, fighting for his life, after a vicious and unprovoked attack, one that he never saw coming. That morning, after waking up, Johnny spent some time with his mother and some of her visiting friends and relatives as they had a New Year's brunch. He made a call to his sister and her husband to wish them a happy new year and tell them all about the parties that he had attended over the weekend. They also discussed his plans for college, since pretty soon he'd have his diploma and would be ready for his next step. They made dinner plans for the following week, and he ended the call with an "I love you" before hanging up. After the weekend, he didn't have much going on that New Year's Day, except for plans to spend time with his girlfriend. She lived just a block away. The plan was to spend some time at her place for a bit, then grab pizza and a movie. He went over to her place, but she wasn't feeling very well. So after a while, she told Johnny he could come back later to see if maybe she was feeling better. So he decided to meet with a friend and head over to a local arcade named Games, located on 77th Street and 1st Avenue. At the time, arcades were also popping up all over the place. Before home consoles took over, and before online gaming, New York City and the rest of the country had a lot of arcades. And if not, there were places with arcade machines in them. If you were uptown in the 90s, everywhere from bodegas to laundromats to pizzerias had the latest games. The roots of what many know as the FGC, or the fighting game community, all started in places like these. Take Chinatown Fair on Mott Street, for example. The Upper West Side had spots like Burger Plus on 102nd and Broadway, where kids of all ages would flock to the Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter II machines. Later on, at other locations, it was Street Fighter Alpha, Killer Instinct, Tekken, and the Marvel vs. Capcom series, among others. The games brought everyone together, and even though the neighborhood wasn't the safest, there were rarely any issues, just a lot of trash talking and some tense moments, and you could find yourself becoming good friends with people whose names you didn't even know yet, people you'd find yourself still friends with years down the line. The energy in these places was unforgettable. Everyone huddled around, screaming in excitement whenever someone was beaten, or when the reigning champ was finally forced to go to the back of the line. You put your quarters on the screen, you said you had next, and let the battle begin. Arcades.
Hey, I ain't gonna lie, man. Jose bringing back some great memories from my childhood, y'all. Like, I grew up in the 90s, and the arcade era was still going on, and I can remember going to the arcade with my friends. It was called Diamond Gems back here where I live. I meant to say back in the day when I used to go there, it was called Diamond Gems. It was at our local mall, and it was a freaking arcade where on a Friday or a Saturday, you already know it's jumping. It's jumping like a club in there. You know what I'm saying, man? We got our quarters, and we just having a great freaking time. And also Chuck E. Cheese, too. It's just a shout out to Chuck E. Cheese. Chuck E. Cheese still going on to this day, but it's not like it was back then, y'all. Like, man, I just can't even explain it. And I just also too want to say, I know I'm going on just kind of off the road, but just follow me real quick. I want to just talk about how the fact that Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, and Marvel Capcom sort of counter, but Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat was just the three biggest games in the arcades, y'all, at least where I'm from. And it's so, like, not crazy, but it just feel good to know that those games still exist to this day. They still putting out. I think Tekken 8 just came out. A new Mortal Kombat just came out. A Street Fighter 6 came out like 2-3 years ago. Like, they continuing those franchises, and they all originated from the freaking arcades, man. And I was a part of that. Let's go.
Were blowing up around the way, and at amusement parks, malls, and theaters across the country. The city usually saw bigger arcades like Playland in areas like Times Square, or other areas where arcades were legally permitted, but their popularity couldn't be escaped. Later on in the city, you had places like Broadway City Arcade becoming hotspots, but there were problems when rivals often bumped into one another while there. Games was one of those local hotspots for teens in the 80s. Places like these were increasing in popularity all throughout the 80s. In 1985, you had The Last Dragon released in theaters. The movie's plot involved a young man from Harlem named Leroy, also known as Bruce Leroy, who has dreams of becoming a master martial artist like Bruce Lee. He finds himself going up against the villains in the film, Sho'nuff, the Shogun of Harlem, and you guessed it, Eddie Arcadian, the self-proclaimed video game king. That's how popular arcades had become. Now, there wasn't a huge community for fighting games in '84, but the atmosphere was the same. The games popular throughout the decade were titles like the Pac-Man series, Defender, Galaga, Dragon's Lair, and Star Wars, just to name a few. You'd find
Hey, I gotta say shout out to Pac-Man, Galaga too, man. Like I kind of forgot about them, but I'm telling y'all, those fighting games was where it was at because that when the real competition kicked in at. But shout out to Pac-Man and Galaga.
teenagers from all over looking to get a few games in, or if they didn't play, they were there with friends who did. But residents nearby weren't so fond of the place. By 84, people who lived above and nearby the arcade were trying to get it shut down for 2 years already. This was said to be due to the constant crowds and noise. It was said that a lot of the teens would drink and smoke outside on the street at all hours. In other cases, neighbors complained of vandalism on their cars and inside of their lobbies, while complaints were also made about residents being harassed. It wasn't always packed here, but when it was hard to hide. If the cops were called, teens would drop whatever they were smoking and drinking and jump into the arcade, as if they were playing games the entire time. There were times when residents who lived above the arcade would throw eggs and water to the streets below in an attempt to get the kids off their block. Some parents of teens in the area shared those negative feelings as well, saying that the arcade was a huge distraction and pulled kids away from their schoolwork. It also caused them to put a lot of quarters into those machines, running through whatever money they might have saved. Johnny and his friend made their way in, where they would greet others who were regulars, just like they were. They separated when inside, and Johnny began playing Star Wars in a corner of the room. It was a true favorite of his. He was on the game for about 45 minutes, when out of nowhere, a commotion broke out. Two guys entered games, and they seemed to be looking for someone. These guys weren't regulars at the arcade, but they were still known around the way. According to reports, they would begin harassing other kids, and if anyone even looked at them wrong, it quickly became confrontational. Johnny was attempting to exit the arcade, likely not wanting anything to do with whatever this was about. But before he could, one of the two guys who had entered stopped him, all because Johnny looked at him. The guy told him, "You better stop making those threatening phone calls." But Johnny had no idea what he was talking about, and he said that to the guy, but he wasn't happy with that answer. It was stated that he might have tried to rob Johnny for his jacket, but he refused. According to eyewitness testimony, the second guy, who was also harassing people, would say, "Whose kid is this? Get him out of here before he gets hurt." But that first guy wouldn't let Johnny leave. When he tried, he was pushed back into the corner. The second guy suddenly ran out of the arcade, only to return a few moments later, armed with a baseball bat. That's when the first guy told Johnny, "You think you're bad? Who thinks you're bad?" and started to choke him and punch him in the stomach, while a crowd of teens and children looked on, confused and frightened. As Johnny tried to cover himself from the attack, the second guy fought his way through the small crowd and began swinging the bat, striking Johnny in the head and the rest of his body.
I mean, what a freak are the adults though? Like, there gotta be some adults in this building. I know it's way more children, but who the freak running this goddamn games? Where they at, man? Where are the employees? You know what I'm saying? What the? Man, listen, it's just so crazy for them to be doing this just out in public like that.
Over and over and over again. Now, he was being attacked by one guy with a bat and another using his fists to beat him as he went down. While the second guy delivered vicious blows to Johnny's head and body with that baseball bat, the other guy went around the arcade menacing the others, telling them to keep playing their games like nothing was happening, telling them to stay shut about it. Nobody wanted to be attacked, so they stood back. Nobody helped. During the attack, a young girl was also shaken and thrown to the ground by the same guy that first started to hit Johnny. After about 5 long minutes of a savage beating, the first guy would warn Johnny not to call the cops and to stay on the floor before they ran out. Johnny was now in and out of consciousness, halfway into a coma, and lying in a pool of his own blood. Some reports stated that as the horror unfolded, the token seller at the arcade barricaded himself in the back behind a glass door. Johnny's friend would break through the glass and reached into the office for a phone, dialing 911 and Johnny's mother shortly after. A manager at the arcade was also said to have called 911. When police arrived at the location, they were surprised at what they found. There were kids inside, playing games as usual. It didn't even look like anything had happened. They expected the place to be cleared out by now, but it was still an active scene. Kids fixated on the screens in front of them. But as authorities went further into the arcade, they would find Johnny on the ground. EMS would arrive minutes later, but by this time, he had already slipped into a coma. But he was alive. Johnny's mother, who had received that phone call from his friend, was told that there had been a fight and Johnny was attacked with a baseball bat. Without hesitation, she ran out of their East 83rd Street apartment, trying to get to the arcade as fast as she could. Her boyfriend told her to wait a minute while he pulled the car around so they would get there faster. But in the moment, eager to get to her son, she ended up exiting the car about a block away from the arcade, running the rest of the way, only to find police cruisers and an ambulance parked out front. When she made her way inside, she saw Johnny laying on the ground, and he was being given oxygen. She couldn't bear the sight of her son in this condition. She started to lose her composure, crying and almost fainting right where she stood. 2 officers near her would help her stay standing and took her into the squad car so she could be driven to New York Hospital, where EMS would be taking Johnny. He was in a coma, but even then, he was still alive. The next few hours at the hospital were grueling. The uncertainty of what would happen, her son fighting for his life. It's something a parent never wants to experience. A nightmare in every sense of the word. Pretty soon, a doctor from the intensive care unit would provide an update on Johnny's condition. His skull had been cracked by the baseball bat, and there was bleeding and swelling in his brain. They had more tests to run, but they had very little hope that his condition would improve. They believed his brain would show very little activity, if any. As they ran more tests over the next few hours, others would arrive at the hospital, including over 30 of Johnny's friends and his father. Word had quickly gone around about the savage attack at the arcade. His friends just wanted to be there as support and to let him know that they were there for him. Later on around midnight, Johnny's sister and her husband arrived. They were distraught and in shock. They had just spoken to him earlier that day. This was the last thing that they expected. When they reached the waiting room, they were greeted and hugged by several of Johnny's friends, most of them in tears. Then they sat together in prayer, hoping he would somehow pull through. Another doctor came down to let the family know that after tests, they could see just a hint of brain activity, and maybe if they relieved the swelling and stopped the bleeding, there was a small chance that they could restore his brain functions. But at around 2 a.m., a surgeon came down once again to provide a devastating update. They had done just about everything they could to try and save Johnny, but there was only a 5% chance that he would live. When it came to the recent scans that they had performed after their last update, they would inform the family that his condition had only worsened. The scans showed a flatline, no activity. At around noon on January 2nd of 1984, Johnny Habib was removed from the life support machines that were keeping him alive since he was brought in. Johnny was gone. The news.
Man, rest in peace to Johnny, y'all. This is just one of those ones where it was such a senseless murder, man. Like, why the freak did... And then I got a feeling that these... And I pray to God, Jose, please tell us that these dudes got caught and we figure out who the F they was. Because I feel like they was freaking in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, I feel like they was some grown-ass men, adults, sitting up there beating on a little child. Even though he wasn't a little child, he was a young adult, you know. Still a teenager, you know, but he was transitioning to becoming a man or whatever. But it's like, dude, why did y'all do... Like, they clearly didn't go in there looking for Johnny. So, whoever y'all was looking for, y'all just decided to take it out on him? Even though one of them had said that, I think Jose said he said something about you gonna stop making those phone calls or something. Man, I don't freaking know, y'all. Either way it freaking go, man. This was just so senseless and unjustified. Johnny ain't want no problems with y'all. Point blank, period.
This was horrible for his loved ones. His family went into the room afterward, holding his hands and giving him a kiss goodbye, unable to fathom that this was really happening. It was only then that the reality of it all would begin to set in. It was the worst news that they had ever heard. Someone who never had any problems with anyone witty, charismatic, and just focused on his future, taken from them in a brutal attack, and they had no idea why. No idea who would ever want to do this to him. Nothing felt real. Feelings of grief and shock weighed heavy on everyone. Less than 24 hours before this, he was in his home, eating and enjoying time with loved ones. Nobody expected that a trip to an arcade he had been to so many times before would leave him fighting for his life. Now, out of nowhere, his family and loved ones were forced to say goodbye when they were nowhere near ready to let him go. As Johnny's family received the horrible news, his friends would learn the identity of the guys responsible for the attack. According to a friend of his, just hours after his passing, about 200 of Johnny's friends got together and they were searching every block of the Upper East Side looking for these guys, and they only had one thing in mind: revenge. They decided they wouldn't be cooperating with authorities and would have their own manhunt. Kids from the Bronx and other parts of Manhattan made their way to the area, and they were armed with everything from knives to pistols to shotguns to even grenades. That last one might sound a little far-fetched, but in the 70s and 80s, places like the Bronx were known to have all types of weapons on the streets, even the types reserved for the military.
I've seen 357s, I've seen 12 gauge shotguns, I've seen 12 gauge pumps, I've seen hand grenades, I've seen beer can bazookas made. Just about things that you think you never see on the street. I've seen dynamite on the street.
The teens would set their focus on the building of one of the attackers, waiting for hours and hours at an apartment right across the street, hoping that they would set their sights on one or both of the men and get to them before the cops did. But nobody ever showed up. A few of the teens later smashed the glass front door of the building, upset that they couldn't get their hands on the guys. While many had agreed to keep any information away from the cops, officers who had visited the arcade after the attack already had leads. They were able to get descriptions of the men, and even their names. Meanwhile, the teens who had vowed to get to Johnny's killers before the cops could began to calm down, deciding that their approach maybe wasn't the smartest thing, and they shouldn't make an impulse decision, one that would likely have a negative effect on everyone involved.
I agree, man. Like, shout out to them for, I feel them on that, the teens, you know what I'm saying, Johnny friends, for wanting to just take matters into their own hands and go deal with those two mother you know what's themselves. But at the end of the day, them dealing with them two mother you know what's themselves would just put them in trouble. You know what I'm saying, man? It would just F their life up. Johnny already lost his life, and now y'all about to potentially lose y'all life by having to spend the rest of it in prison. So I feel like, man, this is the police got to do what they need to do, man. We got to get the police involved, man, and let law and order take into effect.
They soon began to cooperate with authorities, doing what they could to get justice for their friend. The guys responsible for the senseless and vicious attack were 17-year-old Joseph Brennan and 21-year-old Richard Denini, also from the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was Denini's grandmother's apartment that Johnny's friends had been across the street from when waiting for him on 88th and Lexington Ave. It was where Denini lived. He had prior arrests and trouble with the law going back to his teen years, some of those for assault. In 1981, he and a friend threatened someone with a knife in a train station. For that, he was charged with menacing and criminal possession of a weapon. He was supposed to appear before a judge at a Bronx courtroom on January 7th of 1982, but he was MIA. He never showed. A warrant for his arrest was issued on January 25th of 1982, but he was never arrested. They couldn't get a hold of him. He was actively avoiding the police. Joseph Brennan was said to have come from a good family, the son of a superintendent at the building they lived in on East 57th Street. His family was very much shocked, highly upset and disappointed at his involvement in the crime. Before this had taken place, no member of their family had ever been involved in anything like this, or even into trouble with the law. That included Joseph. They stated that his ability to learn was highly affected during an accident he had as a kid, one that would leave 6 small pieces of bone stuck in his brain. His family was known for contributing much of their time and money to their community. They were a very tight-knit family. They were entirely blindsided by Joseph being involved in this. According to
And I just gotta say, man, I was off, y'all. I was thinking a little wrong in my mind. I'm thinking that they freaking some like old grown men, like grown men, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s maybe. But no, they one on 21, the other one 17. He was younger or around the same age as Johnny, but it still don't excuse what the F they did at all. Regardless, charge them like they freaking adults.
to witnesses, it was Brennan who stopped Johnny and began hitting him, and it was Denneny who ran out and came back with a baseball bat, eventually cracking his head open. Thanks to the information they were provided, police had been checking Denneny's building on and off the whole day, but he wasn't showing up. That's until around 11 p.m. on January 2nd, just hours after Johnny's life ended. It was then that they tried again, and this time, Denneny had been to the home, and he left the bat used in the attack right in the staircase of the apartment building. As they made their way to the back of the apartment, they found Denneny making an escape, trying to climb out of a window in the back room, but he was arrested and brought in for questioning.
You got to be a stupid motherfucker to leave the damn bat right there. The bat that you just beat across Johnny's head, and just the whole fact that you went back to the apartment that quick. Like, dude, you think what you did is a game? You don't think the police is gonna come find your ass?
They had a lot to ask him and Brennan. Number one being, why? Why did this happen to begin with? It turns out, Brennan and Denneny weren't looking for Johnny at all. They were looking for an entirely different person. Brennan believed at the time that Johnny was someone named Brian, another teen who they said had been making threatening prank phone calls to Brennan's girlfriend. His girlfriend was also said to be Denneny's sister. So when they both went into games, they were there to put a stop to it, without ever confirming if they had the right person. But just moments after they carelessly and savagely attacked Johnny, they would run into the actual person that they were looking for, a 14-year-old, and they beat him too. But he would escape with only minor injuries and a concussion. Brennan and Denneny ran once they heard the sounds of sirens approaching, stopping them in their tracks. It was also stated that Brennan's girlfriend and the girlfriend of the person they actually had problems with had some sort of disagreement in the past. All of this stemmed from issues that began weeks before this, and the entire time, they were bent on getting their hands on who they had problems with. Their tunnel vision steered them completely wrong, creating a whirlwind of grief and turning the reality of Johnny's loved ones into a total nightmare. It was also stated that Brennan said Johnny gave him a, quote, funny look, a vicious beating over nothing. They would both be charged with Johnny's murder, and they would both plead not guilty. Johnny's mother fought her way through every emotion imaginable, trying her best to stay positive, but the truth was, in her heart, she didn't want to be here anymore. She was quoted as saying, "I wanted to die. I wanted to go to Johnny. I felt Johnny was calling me. He wouldn't rest until I got there." It just reached a point where she was no longer afraid of the end. The loss left a hole in her heart that could never be filled. Everything in their home, walking in the parks that she once took him, just walking around the neighborhood, it all reminded her of her son. She no longer wanted to leave home. It just hurt too much. With time, certain things would become easier than others, but him being gone, it just wasn't something that his loved ones could ever truly prepare for. His mother and sister would then start the heartbreaking process of cleaning out his room, giving away his autographed baseball cards and hundreds of toy soldiers that he had collected since young. His family kept some of the things he owned to remember him by. His room was filled with tin cans holding the cards. Other items like his Walkman his sister got him were still there. They were all reminders of him, all pleasant and loving reminders, but at the same time, extremely painful. An article from April of 1984, written by Johnny's sister, details the pain her and the rest of the family felt. It's truly heartbreaking. After her son had become a victim of this random attack, Johnny's mother would write a letter to Mayor Ed Koch, requesting that arcades in the city have security guards to prevent another senseless tragedy. She didn't want another family to have to suffer a loss the way they did. The huge loss was also felt by his friends, who would spend the coming months trying their best to cope, coming to terms with all that had taken place. People from all over the city who couldn't understand how this all unfolded so quickly and so violently. One of his friends was quoted as saying the following: "I used to feel invincible. There was this kind of magic circle around me. Now, I don't feel it anymore." Just one day after Johnny's life was taken inside of Games, the location was once again open. Crowds of teenagers coming and going like they always did. Most knew of what happened. Some saw it unfold with their own eyes, but it didn't keep them away, and they weren't talking about it. Johnny was given an honorary diploma from City Ass High School. He was set to graduate at the end of that same month. The graduation ceremony would be held in his memory. The night before the ceremony, Johnny's mother and father spent time sharing memories of him, talking about how much people liked him and how loved he was. But most of all, they spoke of how much he loved to live. How even though he was young, he had experienced more than some people twice his age. It wasn't easy for them to talk about their son as a memory, but it was also something that they both needed. The tragedy would bring them closer together. They missed him with everything they had. The rest of 1984 would be a slow and painful period in which everyone who loved Johnny was waiting for justice to be served. In November of 1984, a 3-week trial started for Joseph Brennan, while Denneny would have a separate trial later on. There would be testimony from eyewitnesses who had seen everything as it happened. A jury of 4 women and 8 men would listen to every last detail of the incident. And on Thursday, December 13th of 1984, after 2 days of deliberation, Joseph Brennan was found guilty of a lesser charge of manslaughter. And on Thursday, January 24th of 1985, he was sentenced to a maximum of 7.5 to 22 years in prison. But as of 1993, he's been a free man after being released on parole. Richard.
Man, here we go with the BS again, y'all. I'm not even finna get all upset because y'all know how Jose do, man. He tells so many of these stories, man, of these people who commit murder. That is murder. First of all, it's not manslaughter. First of all, let me calm back down. It's not freaking murder, Bean Team. We all know. I mean, it's not manslaughter, Bean Team. We all know it. We all know it's murder. And the fact that you give him 7 to 22 years and in 1993, so what? 9 years after he did this, he back a free man. This man been free 1993. That's free. This man been free for 31 years, y'all. If he's still living, I hope he ain't, and I hope he in hell. You know, I'm being serious. I just had to say that. But dude, what the freak? Here we go again, man. Jesus, man. Let's find out what the other dude got. I feel like the other dude's sentence going to be even worse than that.
Denneny was set to have his trial start a month after Brennan's. In the summer of 1985, he too was sentenced to 7.5 to 22 years in prison, and he was served the full 22 years, being released on November 16th of 2007. The future for Denneny was filled with upsets. He would end up having a bad drug and alcohol habit and in rehab to try and kick his addictions. What he and Brennan had done to Johnny back in 1984 could only be found in a small number of news articles. By 2007, it had already been over 2 decades since it all happened. But the past, sometimes, has a strange way of returning.
History repeating itself, but I just gotta say, even Denneny, I don't even give it. He served a whole 22 years, but that shouldn't have been, the max shouldn't have been 22 years. The max should have been damn life in prison. Seriously.
Okay, we are learning more about what led to a deadly police shooting last night in Middletown. Jackson Wang joining us with the latest details from state police and the district attorney. Jackson, what are they saying about it?
Solomon, police and officials are saying 53-year-old Richard Denneny threatened to shoot Middletown police officers over the phone. Once officers got to the scene, he refused to drop the pistol that was in his hand after several orders from police, and that's when police say they fired several shots at Denneny, killing him.
I was sitting on my couch and I heard boom, boom, boom. and I jumped off the couch.
What Linda Reed heard was the aftermath of a confrontation between Middletown police officers and 53-year-old Richard Dinini. Police say Dinini refused to drop what appeared to be a semi-automatic pistol following several orders from 2 officers. That's when they opened fire.
Middletown Police Department officers on the scene discharged their service weapons, striking Mr. Dinini.
The pistol was later found to be a pellet gun. Police say officers attempted CPR until Dinini was brought to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Before the confrontation, police say Dinini made a 911 call threatening officers over the phone.
The phone call that he made to the City of Middletown Police Department, he stated that essentially he wanted to die, that he had the gun, and he was going to shoot any police officers that were in there.
Police say he also threatened to kill his girlfriend, who had an order of protection against him. The 2 officers that fired their weapons have been put on paid administrative leave as the investigation continues, but the Middletown police chief says he stands by their actions.
The information that I have right now is congruent with their training and their training provided to them by the department, and also consistent with the law.
Under county protocol, the Orange County District Attorney's Office is leading the investigation with the assistance of state police.
History freaking repeating itself. You see why I said, man, he should have just been locked up for life. And then he had a whole bunch of charges even before he even murdered Johnny. He should have been locked up a long time ago anyway for all that other ish he was doing.
After Richard Dinini was slain, his past would come right back, and Johnny Habib's name was once again a part of the headlines. Everything Dinini and Brennan had been charged with in '85 was circulating again. A reminder that although it happened so long ago, what was done to Johnny, what they were responsible for, it still mattered, and it wouldn't go away. Their negligence, their rage, and their impulse decisions would follow them forever. Johnny Habib left behind friends and family who struggled to move on from this tragedy, people who miss him dearly, loved ones who still remember his wit, his sense of humor, his desire to eventually achieve his goals. His entire future, everything he had set his heart on, snatched away in an instant by 2 total strangers who had a vendetta. One that would end up claiming the life of someone who was completely innocent and not at all connected to their foolish and childish rivalry. For their negligence and for their desire and decision to shed blood, Johnny wouldn't even make it past 18 years old. His memory lives on through friends and family, and they'll never stop missing him. If alive today, Johnny would be 58 years old. Rest in peace, Johnny Habib, and my deepest condolences go out to his loved ones. You aren't forgotten.
Rest in peace to Johnny Habib, man. You are not forgotten. Just the fact that you think about it, like, man, he would have been 58 today. You know what I'm saying? And that 58, that's still young, y'all. He still would have a long life to live. His life was cut so freaking short by some nonsense. Just pure nonsense. I thought he looked like somebody else. All that BS, and then the fact that I can't let it go. Y'all know I'm not gonna let it go. The fact that he well, not him, but his 2 killers, his 2 murderers, they talking about manslaughter and all that BS. That was freaking murder. The fact that they are free now, one of them dead now because he repeated this, history repeating itself. And when I say history repeating itself with Dinini, I mean more like that he always involved in like crimes and stuff, and now he especially after he pretty much done got away with murder, y'all. He didn't get away with it because he served 22 years, but that 22 years is not long enough, so he get back out on the streets. He feel like he back free, and guess what? Those same type of tendencies, those same type of things that he did way back then to Johnny and all the stuff he was doing before that is gonna resurface again. Long story short, short story long, man. I was finna say these police gotta do better, but I just feel like, and I'm just gonna speak for where I live in the United States, us as a whole, we gotta change some of these laws and stuff, man. I promise y'all, I done said it before, I say it again. If we just take away all that, you get 7 to 22, you get 8 to 19, you get 19 to 34, you get 27 to 42 years. If we just take away all that BS and just be like, look, If you murder somebody, you spending life in prison, and there's a 50-50 chance that you're gonna get the death penalty. I promise you a lot of these murders will stop, y'all. I promise y'all it will be some type of decrease in these murders, especially something like this, man. Just this randomness, even though it went random, but it was random to Johnny. They were strangers to him. He didn't know who the freak these dudes was, man. God damn, man. I hate stories like this, y'all. Well, it is like the victim didn't even know they damn killers before the day that they killed them. You know what I'm saying? Just a random act like that, man. Rest in peace to Johnny, y'all. This was a great video from my brother from another, Jose Ortiz, man. Glad he shared this story with us. I appreciate y'all coming on back as always. I'm gonna let y'all go because y'all know that I can keep going on and on and on about this story. One more thing I gotta say though, one more thing that was on my mind before I let y'all go is that family, man, New Year's will never be the same again. That happened in 1984, and every New Year's since then, that was New Year's of 1984, which is what, 40 years ago. But it within the since 1984 to 2024, all his family members that still living on New Year's, they will always think about Johnny Habib. You know what I'm saying, man? New Year's will always not just be this celebratory thing in their family because a tragedy happened. Sort of like with my neighbors, man. They daughter died on Christmas, and Christmas just will never be the same again because you will always have that thought in your head. But I digress. Like I said, y'all, I'm gonna let y'all go now, and before y'all leave, just please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And come on back tomorrow for another That Chapter Wednesday. And until then, my friends, also remember this: love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.